In Chapter 2, we discuss the importance of data collection and analysis to the criminal justice system. Since the 1960s, the system began to be driven by the results of data analysis. Our government, both at the federal and state level, spend no longer millions but billions of dollars in creating agencies and making funding opportunities available to individuals who wish to collect and analyze criminal data. The importance of understanding how you collect data will be discussed as it relates to criminal justice, as well as the importance of the data and the way that it is incorporated into the daily operations of the criminal justice system. Every agency at every level is data driven, and that is in terms of law enforcement, the courts, and corrections. Research is used to shape public policy concerning criminal justice, especially in the area of sentencing. For example, it is imperative that we know and understand the dynamics of domestic violence or the dynamics of murder. When you understand based on facts that are both valid and reliable and have been collected in a methodology that is sophisticated, then you begin to understand, without using myth or what is believed to be intuitive, that there is indeed a reality that we can begin to predict behaviors. That is the absolute first and foremost importance of research. It allows us to attempt to predict human behavior as it relates to aberrant behavior, that is crime. Data allows us to analyze and evaluate existing programs as well as policies, and where necessary we can reorganize those agencies and redraft those policies to reflect what is actually occurring. Many of you are going to get your first professional positions in the criminal justice arena that are going to be based on soft money. Soft money is grant money. Let's say, for example, you have a great idea as to how to reduce juvenile delinquency in your particular neighborhood or town or city. Your idea involves working with the schools. You are going to first create your idea, and then you are going to go to the state's crime commission, present your idea to a group of professionals. They will review your proposal. A significant part of your proposal is going to be how do you intend to analyze and evaluate the effectiveness of your program. That you will find in a $10,000 grant application or a $500,000 grant application. The program that you create is going to literally live a number of years to be continually funded, or it is going to die and be eliminated based on the results of the research methodology that you created to analyze the effectiveness of your program. Now take that idea and overlay it into all of the agencies in the criminal justice system, both at the federal and state level. Also, all of those hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of research money that is made available. This is how the money is distributed. A great deal of importance is given to awarding grants to those funding proposals that have a solid research methodology attached to evaluate the efficacy of the program. We collect data in the criminal justice system using a number of methodology. The first one is the Uniform Crime Reports. This is rapidly changing as I speak. We are moving into an incident-based reporting system, but because of the problems in implementing a very complex way to count crime, we are still using the Uniform Crime Report system in many of the national, state, and local communities. Therefore, the Uniform Crime Report, UCR, is still a very viable methodology being used to analyze the amount of crime that occurs at a local, state, or national level. From that, then, we also have a second means of counting crime. Now we are using the idea of, let's take a look at the victims. Here we have the National Crime Victimization Surveys. The acronym is NCVS. The third area of counting criminal activity and analyzing that activity is offender self-reports. We will discuss each one in length. The Uniform Crime Reporting System is a totally volunteer approach to counting the kinds of crime that occurs in America. It has an interesting history. It was created at the request of Congress to J. Edgar Hoover in the early 1930s. When you can't sleep and you listen to those old crime movies on TV where you have Mal Barker and Machine Gun Kelly and those individuals, for the first time in the history of our country, in fact probably in the history of the world, you had instantaneous communication. Think about it. You could turn on a radio and hear a news report that would be probably just moments after the crime occurred. By that I mean maybe an hour or 2 hours, which at that time would be considered instantaneous. You also have the mass population able to hear this instantaneous news. What they were hearing were these news reports of these notorious and nefarious criminals robbing banks, killing people, etc. Congress starts to get all of these letters and phone calls from concerned citizens saying what in the world is going on. They go to J. Edgar Hoover, who at the time, now Hoover may have wore dresses and he was a great blackmailer, but he was also a phenomenal administrator. Hoover understands that with information you have power. At the request of Congress, he says, yes, I will try to find out in a methodical way by actually counting crime that occurs and being responsible for the agency that will collect and culminate and disseminate the information. Then I can tell you if this is just a sensationalistic understanding of criminal behavior, that is, as you know, the media is going to hype everything, or is there indeed a real increase in the crime that is occurring in this country. Over a period of years, he creates a database. Now he has the line base, which is the first year or two that they collect this information. It is collected then and still today on a voluntary basis. Police departments who agree to do this will have an individual who answers the phone, and upon the information that is received, there is a report that is then filed. Now, in many instances, this report is digitized and will go right to both the State Crime Commission as well as the FBI. It is the FBI who remains responsible for collating and disseminating this information. What Hoover found is that there was not really a significant increase in crime and murder, but it was indeed much more, not sensational, but the mass public became much more aware, because now you could hear what was occurring in Oklahoma and Utah and other states if you lived in Baltimore or Washington, D.C., whereas before that, you needed to get a newspaper from the local town or area where the banks had been robbed. So you can obviously see the difference. You can begin to understand the importance then of accurately counting crime. UCR works like this. It counts only crimes that are reported to the police. So if you go home tonight and your $2,000 mountain bike is missing from your garage, you call the police. Well, let's go back. Before you do anything, you have a number of choices to make. One, you can say to yourself, you know what, I don't think the police are going to do anything about this, so what the heck, why call them? Two, you think, well, what can they do? There's thousands of people committing these crimes every day, and they're not going to be able to catch the guy, so what the heck? Three, you can have that little patch of marijuana growing in the backyard, and it's coming up pretty good. So you say to yourself, well, I don't want the police looking around here and maybe finding that, so you don't call. Or, last, you call. At that point, forevermore, you are going to be a crime statistic. Let's say you are calling from a county X, and you say to the police, and you live in city Y, and you say to the police that my mountain bike is stolen. They are going to ask you a number of pieces of information that is required, your name, your phone number, exactly what happened. That is going to be filed, and it is going to be shipped to the Crime Commission as well as the FBI. Ultimately, what this means is you can go to the FBI website. I believe it is www.fbi.gov. There will be a link that will allow you to go to the crime statistics. What is so good and so valuable about this kind of information is, let me take a crime such as murder. You can go in and you can say to the computer, I want to know what the murder rate is in the country in 1960, 70, 80, pick a decade and pick a specific year, and hit the button. And it will tell you in 1960, for example, for every 100,000 people that were alive that year, 6, and I don't know for sure, but I'm probably not off by much, 6 lost their lives as a result of a incident identified as murder. And that is the way that statisticians level the playing field for numbers. So it doesn't matter if you are a murder victim in Manhattan Island, which has a total of 7 million people, or you are in a little town of 500. It doesn't matter, because what the statisticians do is they take, for example, the 300 million people that are alive today, and they then take the number of murders that were recorded over the year. It runs anywhere from 19 to 22, 23,000 as an average in the last decade, and then they simply divide that and they come up with a figure that is based on 100,000. So all crime data is based on the index figure of 100,000. Going back, then you can go to your computer and you can say, I want to know what the murder rate is in West Virginia, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, pick a state, in that same year. And it will tell you, again, it is based on 100,000. You can go back and then you can say, I live in County X, so I want to know what the murder rate was in that county for that year. Again, it is going to give you a figure that is going to be based on 100,000. Now, if you live in a small rural area, it is going to be an infinitesimal figure, 0.001. Or maybe there has been no murders reported that year, so it will be 0.00. But whatever it is going to be, it will be there. You can also then say, well, I live in city or town Y, so I want to know what the murder rate is in my town. And again, it is the same thing. This is done for specific crimes. They are the easiest to get information on, and these are called Part 1 offenses or Part 1 index crimes. And these are generally identified by criminologists as street crimes. Part 1 offenses would include murder, sexual assault, aggravated battery, robbery, theft, arson, and auto theft. And I'm probably missing one or two. They are in your text, and you can take a look. These tend to be the crimes that are the easiest to get the information on, because we believe these are the ones that are committed more than others, and they are the ones that most threaten the public safety. Now, I disagree with that, as when you think about it, what about kidnapping? What about drugs? What about guns? All of those kind of things also are involved, but again, the Part 1 offenses do not include those. Those crimes, which can be victimless crimes, prostitution, which can be serious crime, possession of guns, illicit selling of weapons, etc., are identified as Part 2 offenses. We keep account of those, but it is not as easily to identify in the database those kind of crimes as it is to get the Part 1 offenses. Your book gives you a number of illustrations where criminologists have taken the data that has been reported to the police and given it a thorough analysis, and then they come up with the crime index, which again, you can pick a major Part 1 index crime, and you can go back a number of decades and you can choose specific years, and you will find a great deal of data that is provided given the crime picture at that particular time in history. There are a number of limitations to the UCR, and they are serious. Obviously, the first one, what if you choose one of the first three choices that you have that I mentioned, and you do not call the police? That crime then never occurred. There is significant evidence, especially in the area of sexual assault, that people do not call the police to report. There is some nuance to the reporting system. One, for example, is you find out a couple weeks later that it just was your idiot cousin who borrowed your bike and didn't tell you. Even if you call the police, if that form has been already sent, it is not going to be pulled from the file. And there is a great deal of evidence that suggests that that occurs quite a bit. And that is that the information was simply erroneous at the time of the call, yet it remains in the database. Another example, in terms of a limitation, is the way the crimes are actually recorded. Let us say that an individual breaks into a house at night. That is nighttime burglary, and that is a serious Part 1 offense. He finds a female in the residence and sexually assaults her, first-degree rape. He murders her because he does not want her to be able to identify him, first-degree murder. On the way out of the house, he goes through and takes all of the valuables that he can carry. So now he is involved in grand larceny as a result of the breaking and entering nighttime burglary. And as an added measure of protection, he torches the house, and now you have arson. He is caught. He has committed what? 5 major felonies? The only felony that is going to be reported is the one that is the most serious, and that is going to be the murder. Now, those other crimes occurred, but when you are involved in heavy criminal activity, there is not one crime that is committed in the incident. There are a number of very serious crimes that are committed. But only the most serious one will be reported, thus counted in the FBI dissemination of the statistics for that particular crime in that particular region at that specific time and date. Let me provide one more example of how this information can be used in an illicit manner. I am giving you a specific example from the city of Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, in the late 1990s, and still remain today, having a significant high incidence of violent crimes occurring on the streets. The mayor meets with the chief of police and says, we must do something about this. We are losing billions of dollars of tourism and conference monies because people simply are not coming here. Do something about it. The chief of police then has a meeting with his 5 precinct captains and says, we have got to do something about the street crimes and the amount of violence that is occurring in this city. And it is costing us a great deal of money in terms of tourism dollars. Do something about it. 2 of them took his message to heart and told the people who answered the phone and who were reporting, that is, the ones responsible for filling out these forms that go to the FBI, listen, what I want you to do is don't lie that the incident didn't occur, but I want you to reduce it down whenever you can. Meaning, rather than going down as a murder, it goes down perhaps as a serious aggravated assault. That's different. Rather than going down as a first-degree sexual assault, it goes down as a molestation. Significantly different. They did that for about a year. They were caught. What happened is criminologists were examining the data. You do not have significant increases or decreases of 15 to 20% of a crime in any given year. That's something in terms of the psychology of criminal behavior. It may vary by small percentages. 5% is a big jump, either up or down in any given year, but 20%, and one was actually 22% reduction in street violent crime, got everybody's attention. So they began to go back and reanalyze the data, and what they found is these people lied. As a result of that, the Congress has made lying on these forms an actual perjury offense. When you now lie on these forms, it can result in a prosecution and conviction. That's how serious and how important this data has become to understanding our crime picture. What happened to the 2 precinct captains that got caught? One was fired outright, and the other one was given a 6-month suspension and is probably back at work today. Before moving on, I want to mention the concept of clearing crime by arrest. This is a statistic that you see a lot in the paper. Clearing crime by arrest means that when you are arrested, and let's say that you are arrested for a sexual assault, during the interrogation, the police say that we know that you did others. Obviously, we can't prosecute you for them because you've been pretty slick, but we know you did them. Why don't you just admit to us now that you did them? We'll even turn off the tape recorder. If the individual does, and a lot of them will, you would be surprised that when you talk to these individuals how they like to brag about their criminal activities. Let's say that they committed 3 others. At least they tell the police that. Now, there may not be an investigation, there may not be an arrest, and there will not be a prosecution or a conviction. However, in the statistics, Not one rape will be solved, but 3. So anytime the police make an arrest as a result of an investigation, that crime is identified as clear. In a state where you have a murder rate of 100%, let's say you have 100 individuals who are murdered, and there are 91 arrests made for those 100 murders, then you have a clearance rate of 91%. Sounds pretty good. The problem is that it is not based on prosecution or conviction. It is only based on arrest. So if that individual, as he goes through the system, and remember we talked about how you have the preliminary hearing, how you have the initial appearance, all of those things are ports of exit. If determined that it was a bad arrest and he is released, or she, that crime still remains cleared by arrest. I would prefer, as most who follow these statistics, to begin to look at clearance of crimes by actual conviction. If you are a police officer, your promotions, your merit, the efficacy of the way you perform your job is not based on convictions based on that arrest, but it is only based on your arrest for the crime. Please refer to the text as to how the clearance rate is actually developed in terms of the number of crimes that are solved by arrest versus the number of crimes committed, and how that statistic then is created and becomes the crime rate. Your book gives you several illustrations of crime rates, and then also the incidents known to the police, and you can compare and contrast. I will not ask you any information in regards to specific statistics unless I tell you here, because as soon as this is reported, then it also changes. This is very dynamic and changes from day to day, month to month, and year to year. In conclusion to this, please know how the UCR works in terms of reporting crimes, the importance of the data and how it is analyzed, some of the limitations, and then also the major that are the significant part of the UCR, which are those Part 1 offenses. Let me end this by reiterating the importance of this data. This is the data that goes to Congress and is then decided as to how much money the state crime commission that you live in will receive. For example, let's take sexual assault. You live in a state where the sexual assaults are not reported, where they are not reported in the actual number that they occur. So what is known to the police is a much lower figure than what actually occurs. And then when it is time to distribute the billions of dollars of funding that comes from the federal government to the state crime commissions for distribution then to the counties, cities, and small towns, what you have is not a significant increase in the funds to develop programs for domestic violence, to develop programs for sexual assault centers, to develop programs to educate potential victims, to develop programs to educate women and men as to how they can protect themselves from this particular crime. Because the statistics do not bear your particular state receiving a great deal of money, whereas maybe you have a similar situation in another state, similar in terms of population. However, that state does a much better job in convincing the victims that they need to report this crime. Therefore, their numbers of sexual assault are high, and they will then receive more money to develop programs and to sustain those programs that are already in existence. This is not something that is theoretical. or words in a text, this kind of information drives the criminal justice system at its very heart, which is the funding process. Please take a look at the definitions of the Part 1 offenses beginning with murder. I will ask you very general questions, and please listen to the test review analysis, and that will help you. But I do want you to know that we are going to cover these crimes in much more depth and detail in Chapter 3. I would also like for you to know some of the characteristics that we have found based on our collection and analysis of UCR. For example, in the area of murder, we know that that is the least likely Part 1 offense to occur. We know that it has a high clearance rate, at least by arrest. We know some specific characteristics such as related to weather patterns. And for example, we know that there is a greater incidence of violent activity in the summer as compared to the winter. We also know that this is age-driven, and as you sit in class, if you are between the ages of 16 to 24, your book says 20, I'm going to drop it down 4 years by my reading of the literature, you are at the highest risk of being a potential victim of a violent crime, and you also are the individuals who are represented in our prison system who commit violent offenses. That is 16 to 24. As you get older, if you would chart this out, by the time you are in your 30s, you are at the very peak of being at the potential of a violent offense, and it's almost a precipitous drop after that. You reach your 30s, and it plateaus out in terms of the number of victims as well as incidents that occur during that age group of violent behavior. By the time you're in your mid-30s, this chart begins to drop down. The older you get by year, 35, 36, 37, you literally visually see a precipitous drop. So by the time you're in your 40s and later, the chances of you being a victim of a violent crime and or one who perpetrates becomes less and less statistically significant. As we moved into the 1970s, these terms became more pronounced, and I'm almost going to say accepted in a very perverse manner in our culture because there has been so much of this. And that is, I would like for you to know the definition of a murder spree, of a mass murder, and of a serial murderer. In terms of sexual assault or forcible rape, I would like for you to know what that definition includes generally. Some of the characteristics of the victim and the perpetrator are known through the analysis of this crime data. And this is also called victimology because this is a crime where we really look at the victims of the crime as well as the perpetrators. And we know, for example, that many will not call the police. We know that the majority of women who are sexually assaulted have known their assailant. We know that it is related to the location. Many rapes, that is the majority, will occur within the home and go out about 2 blocks from the home in terms of frequency of occurrences. I will have a question about robbery. Robbery is a crime of violence. Many people will interpose the term robbery and theft. They are completely different. When I rob you, that means that I am in your presence. You are looking at me and I am looking at you, and I have a gun, I have a knife, I have a club, or I am just physically more intimidating and powerful than you, and I say to you, give me your property, your money, your wallet, and then I am going to make a threat, or I am going to carry out that threat. That is robbery. Robbery is not theft. Robbery is a crime of personal violence. You can read some of the characteristics that we have been able to interpret from the data on robbery. The next is aggravated assault. This is where I make a threat and then I carry that threat out. If I assault you, I am making the threat. I am going to beat the out of you. That is an assault. A battery is when I actually then carry out that threat. I am going to hit you with my baseball bat, and then I do. That is an aggravated assault and battery. There are various levels of aggravated assault, and they range from simple assault to mayhem. You can see by reading the text that robbery has a better than 50% clearance rate. Most instances it's identified as around 60 to 70. It is related to the weather, and again, it is one of those violent crimes that is associated with warmer weather. You can take a look at the methods that are used in aggravated assault and battery. Most are blunt objects, which would make common sense, and then follows hands, feet, fists, etc. The use of weapons in this Part 1 offense falls right behind hands and fists. As you can see, in this particular time that this data was collected, the number of aggravated assault instances that used guns were 20% approximately, which means that for every 100 aggravated assaults reported, 20 of them involved the use of a gun. The next Part 1 offense is burglary, which is the unlawful entry of a structure. And structure is important because the kind of charge that is going to be given is going to be based on the time of day or night that you committed the breaking and entering or the burglary, and whether or not it was a personal dwelling or a business or maybe a warehouse structure. Those are significant in terms of considering sentencing by the judge. You do not have to have a forcible entry to be charged and convicted of a burglary. You can walk in the door and the door was left open to you, but it still is an unlawful entry and it does not have to be with force. As you can see by the statistics from the UCR, this is a crime that has a high incidence. Generally, when somebody is burglared, they will call the police and report that crime. If for no other reason, they cannot file an insurance claim without also attaching the incident report that was filed by you as the victim to the police department. Please take a look at the characteristics that are identified in your text for this particular crime. Before moving to the last one, I would like for you to see that the clearance rate for this one is very low. It's actually just about a little bit better than 10%. This is a crime that tends to be committed successfully, especially by those who are skilled in this area. It is a hard crime to investigate and to get a successful prosecution for. The next Part 1 offense is one that is of property, and this is where the most criminal activity occurs as the one that is reported the most, and that is larceny theft. There are two kinds of theft. One is larceny. Larceny are thefts that are of low value in terms of the assets. And then there is grand larceny. That is where you have stolen something of higher value. Every state has a different threshold of what is going to be defined as a larceny or a grand larceny. I'm going to say in the area that I live, in those contiguous states around us, it ranges from $2,000 to $3,000. So if you steal my computer, Now, it's not robbing me, because what you have done is you have taken it while I am not looking, I have not given you permission, and we have not had any kind of altercation. No threats, no fights. You simply stole it without my knowledge. I come back into the classroom and my computer is gone. And the computer is valued at $3,000. In most states, that would be a grand larceny. That makes it a felony. Let's say that the computer was worth $900. In most states, that would make it a larceny, which means it is going to be a misdemeanor. The way that it is defined, by what type of larceny is it going to be identified as and charged and convicted for and then sentenced, is going to be by the value of the property that you stole. Remember, there is no one figure that represents the country. Every state has a different value as to what the legislature will define as larceny versus grand larceny. When you look at the various forms of larceny, you can see why this represents the crime that most frequently is reported and I believe then occurs in this country. For example, it involves shoplifting. That alone is going to mean that millions of reports are going to be filed, because if you get caught shoplifting, many store policies is they are going to call the police. Once the police show up, there is going to be a report filed. Motor vehicle theft as a Part 1 offense is kind of interesting. It goes all the way back to 1912, and it was mandated by Congress that motor vehicle theft be counted as a Part 1 offense. Why? Because the insurance lobbyist at the time went to Congress and said, we want to have better data of car theft because we are insuring these cars and want to know as much information as we can. Therefore, if you want to continue having our money to support you in your next election, you will make this a Part 1 offense. And it has been one, I'm pretty sure, since 1912. You can see some of the characteristics that we are a nation of car thieves. It is a high reported crime. Let me here mention the word dark figure. Dark figure means, from a criminological perspective, that we really don't know with any validity and reliability how many incidents of a specific crime occur. For example, we believe that auto theft does not have a high dark figure. We think that the people who call the police represent most of the people who actually have their car stolen. The reason for that is that if you are insured, other than liability, then for you to receive any money from the value of the vehicle that was stolen, you must report it to the police. Unless you stole the car yourself, when you go out and find your car stolen, you are going to call the police. Also, this is a crime that tends to be low in terms of clearance rate. It is a crime that has a high incidence of occurring and a low risk of getting caught. Arson, as a Part 1 offense, also has a number of elements that will define it in terms of the degree of seriousness of the crime and the severity of the punishment one is going to receive if convicted. For example, if you burn a dwelling, that is going to be a first-degree arson in every state that I am aware of, even though there has not been an injury occurred as a result of your arson. If it is of a home, you are looking at a very serious amount of time if convicted in prison. That then goes down in level of intensity to the most common kinds of arsons, which are those where you burn a structure, perhaps a building that is uninhabited, perhaps a barn that is in a rural area, or, as your book suggests, one of the most common kinds of arsons is the burning of vehicles. And I didn't realize, but there has been an increase in this, and it is directly related to the leasing of vehicles that began to be very popular in the 1990s. Those of you who lease a vehicle, you know that when your lease is up, you are only allowed to have so many miles on the car, and if there is an excess of miles, they are going to charge you a substantial penalty. What was occurring, and is still, is that rather than give the vehicle back and end the lease legally, what you will do is you will set the vehicle on fire. Then the leaseor cannot determine if there was an excess of miles. If you get away with it, then you have, for all practical purposes, saved yourself a great deal of penalties in regards to that lease. I would like for you to read some examples of Part 2 offenses. You can do this on your own. They are straightforward. I cannot